The Flat Earth movement is a controversial modern pseudoscientific belief system that claims the Earth is flat rather than a sphere. While belief in a flat Earth dates back to ancient civilizations, the modern Flat Earth movement began in the 19th century with Samuel Rowbotham, an English writer who promoted the idea through his work Zetetic Astronomy. His ideas inspired the formation of the Universal Zetetic Society in the late 1800s, which was later succeeded by the Flat Earth Society in the mid-20th century. This movement saw a resurgence in the 21st century, specifically due to the rise of social media, which allowed believers to connect and spread their claims more effectively. Flat Earthers reject mainstream scientific evidence, including satellite imagery and astronomical data, believing instead that the space industry, governments, and scientific institutions are engaged in a vast conspiracy to conceal the truth. Some claim that gravity does not exist as commonly understood and that the horizon appears flat, which they interpret as proof of their worldview. While there are variations in beliefs among flat earthers, many subscribe to the idea that Antarctica is not a continent but an impassable ice wall surrounding the Earth. This movement is highly controversial due to its rejection of established scientific evidence and its promotion of conspiracy theories. Critics argue that flat earthers spread misinformation and undermine public understanding of science, and this has led to strong pushback from scientists, educators, and even space agencies like NASA. Despite the backlash, the movement has gained traction online, and some adherents have organized international conferences and attempted to conduct experiments to prove their claims, though these efforts have often backfired, inadvertently supporting the mainstream scientific model. Critics often highlight the lack of empirical evidence supporting flat Earth claims, the movement's reliance on misinformation, and its dismissal of centuries of scientific progress. But despite all of this, the movement continues on strongly. The LGBT movement is a broad and diverse social and political movement advocating for the rights and acceptance of lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender individuals. Its modern origins trace back to the mid-20th century, though the fight for LGBT rights can be seen throughout history in various cultures. This movement gained momentum in the United States during the 1960s, specifically after the Stonewall Riots of 1969, which were a series of clashes between LGBT individuals and police in New York City that are widely regarded as the catalyst for the modern LGBT rights movement. Over the decades, this movement has expanded globally, influencing laws, policies, and social attitudes towards sexual orientation and gender identity. LGBT activists and organizations advocate for equal rights in areas such as marriage, adoption, employment, healthcare, and military service. They also seek greater societal acceptance and visibility, emphasizing the importance of combating discrimination, violence, and stigma against LGBT individuals. Many in the movement promote concepts such as gender fluidity and non-binary identities, challenging traditional notions of gender and sexuality. Supporters argue that the movement is essential for ensuring human rights and dignity for all individuals, regardless of their sexual orientation or gender identity. This movement has been controversial in various societies, specifically among religious and conservative groups that oppose its goals on moral, cultural, or ideological grounds. Critics argue that the movement challenges traditional family structures, religious beliefs, and societal norms. And in some cases, opposition has led to significant political and legal battles over issues such as same-sex marriage, transgender rights, and LGBT-inclusive education in schools. Governments and institutions around the world have responded differently, with some enacting protections and recognizing LGBT rights, while others have imposed restrictions or outright bans. Notable achievements of the movement include the legalization of same-sex marriage in numerous countries, the repeal of discriminatory laws, and an increased representation of LGBT individuals in media and politics. Pride parades and other public demonstrations have played a key role in visibility and advocacy, but critiques of the movement often comes from those who believe it goes too far in challenging social norms. Despite the controversy, the LGBT movement has had a profound impact on social and legal progress worldwide. The anti-vaccine or anti-vaxxer movement is a controversial social movement that opposes some or all vaccines, often citing concerns about safety, personal liberty, or conspiracy theories regarding pharmaceutical companies and governments. While vaccine skepticism has existed since the development of the first vaccine in the 18th and 19th centuries, the modern anti-vaccine movement gained momentum in the late 20th and early 21st centuries. A major turning point occurred in 1998 when British doctor Andrew Wakefield published a fraudulent study linking the MMR vaccine to autism. Although his research was later debunked and retracted, it fueled widespread fear and distrust in vaccines, specifically among parents. Anti-vaxxers generally believe that vaccines cause harmful side effects such as autism, autoimmune diseases, or other chronic health issues. Many also argue that natural immunity is superior to vaccine-induced immunity, despite overwhelming scientific evidence to the contrary. Some view vaccination mandates as government overreach and a violation of personal freedoms. Within the movement, there are variations in belief, ranging from those who oppose all vaccines to those who only question specific ones. Conspiracy theories play a significant role in the movement, with claims that pharmaceutical companies, governments, and health organizations suppress information about vaccine dangers for profit. The movement is controversial because it rejects overwhelming scientific evidence supporting vaccine safety and effectiveness. Critics argue that anti-vaccine misinformation has led to the resurgence of preventable diseases such as measles and polio in areas where vaccination rates have declined. Public health officials warn that vaccine hesitancy endangers not only those who refuse vaccines, but also vulnerable populations who rely on herd immunity. The COVID-19 pandemic further intensified the controversy as misinformation about COVID-19 vaccines spread rapidly on social media, leading to protests, resistance to public health measures, and increased polarization. Some figures in the movement, such as Robert F. Kennedy Jr., have gained prominence by promoting vaccine skepticism through books, films, and public speaking engagements. Critics argue that the anti-vaxxer movement thrives on misinformation, fear, and distrust in science, often endangering public health in the process. Despite this, the movement continues to attract followers, specifically in online communities, where distrust in mainstream medicine and government institutions fuels ongoing skepticism about vaccines. The alpha male movement is a controversial social and ideological movement that promotes traditional masculinity and hierarchical male leadership. The concept of the alpha male originates from animal behavior studies, specifically research on wolves, which suggested that certain males rise to the top of social hierarchies. Though this original research was later debunked, the idea persisted and became popular in self-help circles, dating advice, and online communities promoting hypermasculinity. The movement gained traction in the early 2000s with the rise of the manosphere, a collection of online communities focused on masculinity, relationships, and male self-improvement. Alpha male advocates typically believe that men should embrace traits like confidence, assertiveness, competitiveness, and dominance in order to succeed in life, particularly in dating, business, and social interactions. Many followers reject modern views on gender equality, arguing that feminism has weakened men and disrupted traditional gender roles. Some believe that women only seek dominant and successful men, while others focus on self-improvement, wealth accumulation, and physical fitness as pathways to achieving alpha status. The movement includes various subgroups, ranging from pickup artists, who teach seduction techniques, to men's rights activists, who challenge perceived legal and societal disadvantages faced by men. This movement is controversial because of its association with misogyny, toxic masculinity, and opposition to progressive gender roles. Critics argue that the alpha male ideology promotes unhealthy and unrealistic expectations for men, encouraging emotional repression, aggression, and a narrow definition of success. Some segments of the movement have been linked to online harassment, specifically towards women, feminists, and men who do not conform to traditional masculine ideals. Notable figures associated with the movement include Andrew Tate, a former kickboxer turned social media personality who promotes extreme self-discipline, financial independence, and traditional gender roles, often making controversial statements about women and relationships. Others, such as Jordan Peterson, while not explicitly part of the movement, have been influenced in discussions about masculinity, hierarchy, and personal responsibility. Critics argue that the alpha male concept is based on flawed science and outdated social norms, reinforcing harmful stereotypes rather than fostering genuine self-improvement. Despite widespread backlash, the movement continues to grow, specifically among young men searching for guidance in an era of shifting social dynamics and changing gender expectations. Antifa, short for anti-fascist, is a loosely organized, decentralized movement that opposes far-right ideologies, fascism, white supremacy, and authoritarianism. This movement has historical roots in anti-fascist groups from the early 20th century, specifically in Europe, where activists opposed the rise of Mussolini's black shirts and Hitler's brown shirts. Modern Antifa groups emerged in the late 20th and 21st centuries, specifically in the United States and Europe, gaining prominence in response to the resurgence of far-right and nationalist movements. Unlike traditional political organizations, Antifa has no centralized leadership or official membership, instead operating as a network of loosely affiliated activists and groups. Antifa activists believe in direct action to combat fascist and far-right movements. This includes protesting white nationalist rallies, confronting extremist groups, and disrupting events they associate with authoritarianism or oppression. Some members advocate for aggressive tactics, such as property damage, counter-protest, and doxing. Others focus on community organizing, education, and mutual aid efforts to counteract the spread of extremist ideologies. This movement generally aligns with leftist and anarchist principles, rejecting mainstream liberalism, which many Antifa supporters view as too passive in confronting fascism. This movement is controversial due to its confrontational tactics, specifically its willingness to use violence and property destruction to achieve its goals. Critics argue that Antifa's methods undermine democratic principles, as well as free speech, by shutting down political opponents through intimidation and force. Incidents of clashes between Antifa activists and far-right groups, specifically during protests and rallies, have led to widespread media coverage and political debate. Some Antifa activists have been involved in street brawls, vandalism, and attacks on symbols of capitalism, such as corporate buildings and police stations. However, supporters argue that their actions are justified as a necessary response to the dangers of fascism and white supremacy. Critics of Antifa, including conservative politicians and law enforcement agencies, have labeled the group as extremist and accused it of being a terror organization. However, supporters argue that Antifa is a reactionary force against the rise of authoritarianism rather than an organized terror group. Antifa remains a polarizing force in modern political discourse, with debates over its legitimacy, ethics, and effectiveness continuing to shape public perception. The Incel movement, short for involuntary celibate, is an online subculture consisting of primarily men who feel unable to form romantic or sexual relationships despite desiring them. The term incel was originally coined in the 1990s by a Canadian woman who created an online support group for people struggling with romantic difficulties. However, over time, the movement took on a darker, more radical tone, specifically in male-dominated internet forums. By the 2010s, incel communities had become notorious for promoting misogyny, self-pity, and in extreme cases, violence. Incels typically believe that modern society, feminism, and changing gender dynamics have made it difficult or impossible for certain men, specifically those they describe as unattractive or socially awkward, to find romantic partners. Many incels embrace the black pill ideology, which suggests that romantic success is determined primarily by genetics, and that self-improvement is futile. Some incels categorize people based on perceived attractiveness, referring to conventionally attractive men as Chads and desirable women as Stacys, often blaming them for their social exclusion. While not all incels advocate violence, some members of the movement express extreme resentment towards men and society at large. This movement is highly controversial due to its association with online misogyny and real-world violence. Several high-profile mass attacks have been linked to individuals who identified as incels or were inspired by incel ideology. One of the most infamous cases was the 2014 Isla Vista killings, in which Elliot Rodger killed 6 people before taking his own life. Rodger left behind a manifesto detailing his hatred for women and successful men, which has since been idolized in some incel circles. Critics argue that incel communities foster dangerous ideologies, encourage radicalization, and serve as echo chambers for self-hatred and misogyny. Online platforms such as Reddit, 4chan, and Discord have banned or heavily moderated incel-related content due to concerns about hate speech and incitement to violence. Some incels reject these extreme views and advocate for healthier discussions about loneliness, mental health, and dating struggles, though these perspectives often get overshadowed by the more toxic elements of the movement. The incel movement remains a deeply polarizing subject, with ongoing debates about whether it should be seen as a symptom of broader societal issues or as a dangerous extremist ideology that warrants scrutiny. The Femcel movement, short for female involuntarily celibate, is an online subculture consisting of women who have a strong hatred for men and feel like they are unable to form romantic relationships. The term Femcel emerged in the 2010s as a counterpart to the predominantly male incel movement, and while both groups share a sense of frustration over romantic isolation, Femcel communities are distinct in their focus on gender issues, often discussing beauty standards, social hierarchies, and systemic disadvantages that they believe prevent them from finding romantic success. Femcels generally believe that physical appearance, race, age, and socioeconomic status play a significant role in their inability to attract partners. Many argue that society places unrealistic expectations on women to be conventionally attractive, thin, and youthful, leaving those who do not meet these standards feeling undesirable and overlooked. Some femcels adopt a black pill ideology, similar to incels, which suggests that romantic success is largely predetermined and that self-improvement efforts are often futile. However, while incels typically blame feminism and societal changes for their struggles, femcels often critique traditional beauty standards, hookup culture, and the perception that women are valued primarily for their looks. The movement is controversial due to its association with extreme self-loathing, hatred for men, and unrealistic worldviews. While many femcels use online forums to vent about their struggles, some corners of the movement have been criticized for fostering resentment towards men, attractive women, and societal norms. Some femcel discussions also overlap with radical feminist ideologies, while others mirror the hopelessness and bitterness found in incel spaces. This has led to debates about whether femcels should be viewed as an extension to the incel movement or as a separate phenomenon rooted in different societal pressures. Most femcel activity is confined to online spaces, where discussions revolve around personal experiences, venting frustrations, and debating broader social issues. Notable femcel communities have emerged on platforms like Reddit, Tumblr, and specialized forums, though many have been banned or shut down due to concerns about toxic discourse. Critics argue that femcel ideology, like incel ideology, can create unhealthy echo chambers and reinforce negative self-perception and discourage personal growth. Others believe the movement sheds light on the challenges some women face in the modern dating landscape. Black Lives Matter, abbreviated to BLM, is a social movement that advocates against police brutality, systemic racism, and racial injustice, specifically towards black individuals. This movement began in 2013 following the case of George Zimmerman, who shot and killed Trayvon Martin, an unarmed black teenager in Florida. The hashtag Black Lives Matter was coined by activists as a rallying cry against racial violence and inequality. BLM gained significant momentum in 2014 after the police killings of Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri, and Eric Garner in New York City, leading to widespread protests and national conversations about race and policing in the United States. BLM supporters believe that systemic racism disproportionately affects black communities, specifically in areas such as law enforcement, education, and economic opportunities. The movement calls for police reform, accountability, and in some cases, defunding or abolishing the police to reallocate resources towards social services. Many BLM activists also advocate for broader racial justice policies, including reparations, criminal justice reform, and voting rights protections. While many see BLM as a necessary response to racial injustice, critics argue that some of its rhetoric and policy proposals, such as defunding the police, are extreme or impractical. Others claim that BLM protests have contributed to civil unrest, specifically during the widespread demonstrations following the killing of George Floyd in 2020. While most protests were peaceful, some cities experienced riots, looting, and violent clashes with police. Supporters argue that these incidents were often the result of outside agitators or escalators by law enforcement, while critics claim that BLM has not done enough to discourage destructive actions. Notable actions by BLM include organizing nationwide protests, influencing political discussions on policing and racial equity, and pressuring corporations and governments to acknowledge and address systemic racism. The movement has also received substantial donations from individuals, businesses, and philanthropic organizations. However, financial transparency has been a point of contention, with some critics questioning how funds have been managed by BLM-affiliated organizations. Criticism of BLM comes from multiple perspectives, including conservatives, who argue it promotes divisiveness and undermines law enforcement, as well as some within the black community, who feel the movement has not led to any real change. Despite the controversy, BLM remains one of the most influential racial justice movements of the 21st century, shaping discussions on race, policing, and social justice in the US and beyond. The Make America Great Again movement, abbreviated to MAGA, is a right-wing populist and nationalist movement in the United States that emerged with the 2016 presidential campaign of Donald Trump. The movement takes its name from Trump's campaign slogan and is centered around his political ideology, which includes strong nationalist rhetoric, economic protectionism, skepticism towards immigration, and opposition to globalism. MAGA supporters generally advocate for stricter immigration policies, deregulation, tax cuts, and a foreign policy that prioritizes American interest over international alliances. The movement has continued beyond Trump's presidency, shaping the Republican Party and influencing conservative politics in the United States. MAGA has been highly controversial due to its strong association with Trump's polarizing leadership style, his numerous false claims regarding election integrity, and his often combative stance towards the media, political opponents, and even members of his own party. Critics argue that the movement fosters authoritarian tendencies, undermines democratic norms, and encourages conspiracy theories such as QAnon. Many supporters of the MAGA movement have expressed skepticism or outright denial of the results of the 2020 presidential election, leading to significant political unrest. One of the most notable and controversial events linked to the MAGA movement was the January 6, 2020 attack of the US Capitol. Thousands of Trump supporters, many of whom identified with the MAGA movement, stormed the Capitol in an effort to overturn the certification of Joe Biden's presidential victory. The riot resulted in multiple deaths, injuries to law enforcement officers, and widespread destruction. Following the attack, numerous individuals were arrested and charged with crimes, ranging from trespassing to conspiracy and assault. Trump was later impeached for his role in inciting the riot, but was acquitted in the Senate. While the exact number of MAGA supporters is difficult to determine, tens of millions of Americans voted for Trump in the 2016, 2020, and 2024 elections, indicating a broad base of support. This movement has been widely criticized by Democrats, independents, and some Republicans, who argue that it promotes extremism, undermines faith in American democracy, and enables political violence. Despite these criticisms, MAGA remains a powerful force within the Republican Party and continues to shape conservative politics. The Proud Boys is a far-right, all-male extremist group that was founded in 2016 by Gavin McInnes, co-founder of Vice Media. The group is known for promoting nationalism, traditional gender roles, and opposition to what they see as the excessive influence of feminism, political correctness, and left-wing ideology. While the group claims to reject white nationalism, many of its members have been linked to racist, xenophobic, and anti-Semitic beliefs. The Proud Boys became widely controversial due to their involvement in street brawls, political violence, and far-right rallies across the United States. They have frequently clashed with left-wing activists, specifically members of Antifa, in violent confrontations at protests and demonstrations. The group gained significant national attention after President Donald Trump, during a 2020 debate, told them to stand back and stand by, a remark that was widely interpreted as an endorsement of their activities. This led to increased scrutiny of the group and its role in escalating political tensions. One of the most infamous events associated with the Proud Boys was their involvement in the January 6, 2021 attack of the US Capitol. Several high-ranking members, including leader Enrique Tarrio, were arrested and later convicted of conspiracy for their role in organizing and participating in the riot. This attack, aimed at overturning the 2020 presidential election results, resulted in multiple deaths, injuries to law enforcement officers, and widespread destruction of government property. In response, the Proud Boys were banned from major social media platforms, and their leadership faced extensive legal repercussions. Estimates of the group's size vary, but at its peak, the Proud Boys had several thousand members across multiple areas in the United States and abroad. The movement has since dropped in support due to legal crackdowns and internal disputes, but it remains a presence in far-right circles. Critics argue that the Proud Boys promote violent extremism, undermine democratic institutions, and contribute to political instability. Even some conservatives have distanced themselves from the group, fearing its association with political violence. Despite all of this, the Proud Boys continue to attract individuals drawn to their aggressive rhetoric and opposition to progressive politics, making them a persistent force in far-right activism. The Groyp movement is a far-right and often white nationalist political movement in the United States that emerged in the late 2010s. It is largely associated with internet activism, anti-immigration views, and opposition to mainstream conservatism, specifically figures and institutions they deem insufficiently right-wing. The movement was named after Groyp, an alternate version of the Pepe the Frog meme, which was popularized within far-right circles. While the exact origins of the movements are debated, it gained significant attention around 2019 when its followers, often called Groypers, began disrupting conservative events, specifically targeting figures like Charlie Kirk and Ben Shapiro, whom they accused of promoting globalist and neo-conservative policies. At the core of the Groyp movement is a belief in what they call America First nationalism, a rejection of mainstream conservatism, and an emphasis on maintaining what they perceive as traditional Western and Christian values. Many within the movement support extreme anti-immigration stances, opposition to LGBT rights, and skepticism towards US support for Israel. Their rhetoric often flirts with anti-Semitic and racist ideas, leading critics to label them as a white nationalist movement. The group frequently uses trolling, memes, and online harassment to spread their message and target opponents. One of the most notable figures associated with the movement is Nicholas J. Fuentes, a far-right commentator who has played a major role in shaping the Groyper ideology. Fuentes, who gained attention for his inflammatory statements on race, immigration, and Jewish influence in politics, has become a central leader of the movement. Under his leadership, Groypers have organized protests, disrupted events, and attempted to push their ideology into the mainstream conservative discourse. Notably, in 2021, Fuentes and some Groypers were involved in the Stop the Steal movement, which sought to overturn the results of the 2020 US presidential election. Fuentes was also present at the January 6 Capitol riot, though his direct involvement remains a subject of investigation. This movement has been widely criticized from across the political spectrum, as mainstream conservatives view Groypers as extremists who damage the conservative cause, while left-wing and centrist critics condemn them for promoting racism, anti-Semitism, and authoritarian views. Despite their notoriety, the Groyper movement remains a fringe entity, largely banned from major social media platforms due to violations of hate speech policies. Their influence, however, persists in online far-right communities, and their attempts to disrupt mainstream conservative spaces continue to make them a controversial and polarizing force in American politics. The White Lives Matter movement, abbreviated to BLM, is a white nationalist and white supremacist slogan and network that emerged in response to the Black Lives Matter movement. The phrase first gained traction in the mid-2010s as a reactionary statement to the racial justice protests and activism associated with BLM, but it has since been co-opted by extremist groups. While some supporters claim it is about advocating for the rights and concerns of white people, the movement has been widely criticized for promoting racist, xenophobic, and anti-Semitic ideologies. White Lives Matter has been controversial due to its association with hate groups and efforts to delegitimize discussions on racial inequality. The Southern Poverty Law Center and the Anti-Defamation League have classified it as a white supremacist movement, noting that it serves as a rallying cry for far-right extremists who oppose multiculturalism and diversity. This movement has been linked to various far-right demonstrations, including the deadly 2017 Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, Virginia, where white supremacist groups gathered, leading to violent clashes and the death of counter-protester Heather Heyer. One of the most notable movements involving White Lives Matter occurred in 2022 when rapper Kanye West and conservative commentator Candace Owens wore White Lives Matter shirt at a Paris fashion show, sparking widespread controversy. While they argued the phrase was meant to challenge political correctness and highlight double standards in racial discourse, critics saw it as an endorsement of white nationalist ideology. Although the exact number of followers is unclear, White Lives Matter has been promoted by decentralized online communities and local extremist groups. White nationalist organizations have used the slogan to recruit members and spread propaganda, specifically through social media. Critics argue that White Lives Matter is not a legitimate civil rights movement, but rather a racist response designed to undermine racial justice efforts. It has been condemned for fostering hate speech, inciting division, and providing a platform for white supremacist ideologies. While some mainstream conservatives avoid direct affiliation with the movement, its rhetoric continues to be echoed in far-right circles, making it a persistent and controversial force in racial politics. Thank you very much for watching this video, and if you learned something, make sure to leave a like, comment down below your thoughts on anything I discussed in this video, and subscribe if you would like to see a part 2 or more videos like this one. Thank you again, and goodbye.